Welcome to the Operation Paragon podcast. I'm your host, Gabriel Schickler, and joining us today is Trent Keller, who is a young, ambitious individual working in sales. And in our conversation today, we cover finding mentors, curating your circle, the books and principles that have influenced you the most, setting goals and priorities, and much more. If you get value out of this episode, consider subscribing for more. And now let's get into the show. So, gentlemen, I'm here today with Trent Keller, who is a wonderful individual that I had the pleasure of meeting at the Vault conference earlier, I guess just the beginning of September here. So he is active in the entrepreneurship space, specifically insurance, and we really hit it off because he is another motivated young man that just wants to make it and have a positive impact in the world. So, Trent, thanks for coming on, man. Super excited for our conversation here.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Gabe, and I'm really looking forward to having a conversation today and hopefully providing some value for the
Awesome, brother.
listeners.
Yeah, for sure. So just to start us off, give people an idea of where you're coming from. Can you just bring us up to speed on, who you are and how you really found the path that you're on right now?
Yeah, great question. So my name's Trent Keller. I'm from Hagerstown, Maryland originally. I moved to Fort Lauderdale, Florida back in April of 2023. What my path looked like getting to where I am today. Growing up throughout like high school, and I did go to like a local community college and then transferred to a local like satellite campus. So I never went to like a on-campus college per se. But throughout that time, just working like part-time jobs. I worked retail, worked at a local like health food cafe. That was more of like a startup too. So I'd say that was really cool getting to learn almost like a startup type business compared to say like an established chain. And then getting to where I am today, right out of college, I started as a financial representative. So that was life insurance and stocks. And then where I'm at today now, I'm a life insurance broker. So strictly focusing on the life insurance side. And my goal is to build a big agency, help a lot of people make an income for them and their family, and just continue to have a positive impact. But I
Mhm.
come from a family of, I'm the oldest of six siblings. So I have a lot of younger siblings. Family is very important to me, so just trying to always set a good example for my younger siblings as well.
Yeah, for sure, man. I mean, I'm the oldest of seven, so I can totally relate to that.
Okay,
Um,
awesome, man.
but yeah, so of all the different fields that you could have gotten into, why was insurance the one that you decided on? Like, what was appealing about that to you?
Yeah, so I actually had a very close friend who we went to the same community college, and then he was kind of always a year ahead of me because he's a year older. So then, as he was doing different like internships and stuff, he started at the first financial firm that I ended up starting at right out of college, and having that connection was definitely huge for hearing his experiences, the people he was able to meet, and how he was really able to help people in the financial services industry.
Mhm.
And probably since I was like 17 or so is when I first started like reading books on like money. I didn't really like understand anything at the time. I just knew that I did want to become wealthy one day. So I figured starting at like the personal finance level and learning from there and being able to help people with their finances was like a passion of mine.
Mhm.
And fast forward 2 years or so after I graduate college and I started at the other financial firm. That close friend of mine, his name's Ben Corporal. He's one of my very best friends. He ended up going and starting a life insurance brokerage. And for me, it was a no-brainer to go and join him to be around someone who's like-minded, motivated, driven, values family, fitness, faith. Um, so that was something that was very important to me was staying surrounded by a like-minded individual.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. So, did you go the whole 4 years with college, or what did that look like?
Yeah, I did. So I went to a local community college, and then from there, I transferred to it was basically called Frostburg State University.
Oh, gotcha.
They
Okay.
have like a main campus, and then they have like their individual like satellite campuses they call it, to where they're spread out in like different like hometowns or whatever. You go
Mhm.
there like 2 nights per week. It's more really for people who are like kind of working full time and also going to college in the evenings. So that was the
Gotcha.
path I took so that I didn't have to take on any debt to go to college. And
Hmm.
yeah, thinking of that, I'd say the connection, because that was actually like how I met Ben. So I say the connection was worth it. But if I had to do it all over again, I think getting into sales at a younger age probably would have been more valuable for me than going to college
Hmm.
for those 3.5, 4 years.
Yeah. That's a really interesting conversation. I mean, we both pay attention to a lot of the entrepreneurship space. A lot of the guys are at this point very opposed to going to college at all just because of the leverage you get from it. And funnily enough, one of the biggest arguments in favor that I hear nowadays is specifically for the network thing. So it's like not even the classes, and that's a whole
Yeah,
excuse me, that's a whole thing by itself where just like you look at even the fields that it's understandable that there's that additional like certification process for. So things like the hard sciences, medicine, stuff like that. It still takes like I think it's what 7 to 10 years for
yeah,
something to go from groundbreaking to newly published, and in that time, it's already obsolete. So
right.
um, the question of college is really interesting to me. But I was actually having this conversation just last night with a friend of mine. Um, and so I'm really curious, with you saying you would have
Mhm.
rather started in sales. I'm of the opinion that it's probably the highest leverage entry level position, but it's also like it requires a lot more risk tolerance than entering your kind of more conventional 9 to 5. So my two questions on that front are: first, do you think that some people are just naturally good at sales and some people aren't? So basically, do you think that sales should be something for any young man that's listening to this that they should consider going into, or do you think that's something that they should um, weigh based on their individual, personality or abilities or anything like that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think sales is something that any individual can get into. And the reason I say that is because I'm somebody who's naturally very, very introverted. So I know that if I can do sales, and there's a lot of different opportunities where my first sales opportunity that I was a part of, it was more so like warm reach out to like friends, family. I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily the best at that. So that second opportunity that I got into was more of a lead based sales opportunity where I was contacting leads. Um, and it's something that just like any skill set you can work on. And really, it's just communication at the end of the day. So we're all going to be communicating for the rest of our lives, whether it's with our family, friends, spouse, children. So it's something that I believe anybody can get into. And I really do believe it helps you build a thicker skin.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, people are going to be in different situations, but I think if you're a young male who you're in a position to where like your back's not up against the wall that next month and you have to like either sell like go out there and
Mm-hmm.
sell crazy or pay rent. Obviously, it factor in your situation, but I believe if you do have some kind of cushion at all, I think it's a great learning opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you plan on being in the world of business down the road.
Yeah, and it sounds like a big reason that you're saying that is because it it doesn't just teach niche skills. It's kind of a crash course for things that are what you could call like meta skills that can be applicable in pretty much any field
Yeah.
or life, is what you're saying. Gotcha. Yeah, for sure. And kind of on that front, you mentioned that you're an introvert. There was a statistic I saw a little while back that was really interesting that said the majority of salesmen in America are extroverts, but the majority of the top performers are introverts, which is fascinating. My theory, and I haven't dug too far into the literature, but
Mhm.
my theory with that is if you're drawing your energy from just kind of being by yourself and recollecting and just kind of figuring things out on your own, it means one, you're able to dial in and just focus on something without needing outside approval, and two, if you're not drawing your energy from other people, then having like a bad interaction or a bad call probably won't phase you as much. No, like you're saying, I do think a lot of that comes down to just like determination and things that you build up more as habits
Right.
than anything that you're naturally gifted with. But that has been really interesting to me of just like I guess it really comes down to the idea of training beating talent as long as you're really committed to training, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think depending on like what kind of like sales organizations people have been a part of, there's always those people who you always see those people who they're maybe naturally very extroverted, so they have a lot of
Hmm.
success at first, and then whenever things do get tough because maybe they had a faster start, they're maybe not able to push through quite as much as I've noticed the people
Hmm.
who kind of really had to work at it at the beginning and get good slowly over time rather than having like a hot start and then kind of
Hmm.
losing confidence or momentum. So also to think on the introversion extroversion thing, I think it also could be a factor of like extroverts like to talk more and introverts like to listen more.
Yeah.
So if you're able to listen as a salesperson, you're going to be able to hear your clients' needs better to make the best product recommendation and really tie it back to the specific problem they're having.
Hmm. And you're saying not just like listening, so you're like tactically figuring out what you're going to say next, but like actually sitting down and seeing the other person as a person and connecting with them, that kind of
Yeah,
thing,
for
right?
sure. And
Yeah.
not saying that like extroverts don't view it that way at all. I just think I know that we all have those friends who love to talk and I feel like the
I've
ones
been that
who
guy.
really sit yeah, yeah. The ones who like really observe and listen, I feel like they pick up on a lot and that can translate to sales. So
Hmm.
I think that's a very valuable trait that someone who's introverted could use to their advantage instead of seeing it as a disadvantage being an introvert in sales.
Hmm. Yeah, and one other thing that you mentioned with that friend of yours that I think is so important, especially for young people, is getting yourself around the right community and people that have the right mindset and people that motivate you. So, like I said earlier, we met at Vault, which
Hmm.
for any listeners that are unaware, it's this huge business conference hosted by Patrick Bet-David, who's a huge influencer in the entrepreneurship space. I've just been paying attention to your Instagram lately. You went to his book signing. You went to an event with I think it was Tucker Carlson just the other day, something like
Yeah,
that.
that was just last night.
Yep. Yeah. So I guess like in terms of getting that crowd around you and really building that good foundation, um, what would you say would be the things that you look for in the people that you want to spend time with, and what would be the things, especially for an ambitious young man that wants to be successful in the business space, who would be the people that you would try to avoid?
Yeah, so I guess the first part of your question of trying to get around those type of people, I would say the first thing is you got to like become that person yourself
Hmm.
of who you want to be around. You have to become that person. I know for myself, my closest friendships that I value the most, it's was never forced. It
Hmm.
was naturally our beliefs and what we value aligning. So we just naturally came together. So that would be my answer to the first part of the question. And the second part, the types of people to avoid, I would say people who are mainly negative. People don't necessarily have to be the most positive, but as long as you're just not being negative, pessimistic, there's already enough of that going on in society
Yeah.
today. So I believe you mentioned Patrick Bet-David. He always says keeping the phrase in mind of the future looks bright, and then also like only the paranoid survive. So
Hmm.
being 51% future looks bright, 49% like paranoid, you got to keep an eye out and
Hmm.
make sure you're paying attention to what's going on. But yeah, I would say mainly negative people, people who complain a lot, don't take responsibility for where they're at. Not that I'm going to treat them any differently. I just don't want to spend as much time around them
Hmm.
or limit my time as much as possible.
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And one other thing too that's, kind of important with that is surrounding yourself with good role models. So whether that's, consuming the right podcasts or right books or anything like that. Um, we talked a little bit, before we started recording here about the books that we've read and the impact that they've had. So what would you say would be those top, either just like straight up, you'd say, yeah, you have to read this book, or maybe it's some principle that you've picked up in a bunch of different things that you've read. What would you say have been those most impactful, um, just like lessons and teachers, either in a book or a podcast or whatever it is?
Yeah, the first one that comes to mind, and probably the book I recommend the most, is Atomic Habits.
Mm,
That was one that had a big impact on me. I first read that during COVID. So wanted to take that time when we had a lot of free time on our hands because everybody was locked up at home or whatever, to really like set the right habits in place. So that's honestly like when I look back on 2020, that was the year I feel had the most growth or set myself on the the path the best. Just setting the right systems in place, getting very disciplined, um, doing different challenges to like just put myself mentally, physically, whether it's like running, cold showers, things like that.
hmm
So I'd say that would be the book I would recommend the most. And when it comes to like another principle that I find to be very true is a lot of times the things we fear doing are actually the things we do need to do most. So whether it is calling back that client who maybe they left us a voicemail and we're worried they're going to cancel, or not having that conversation that we know we need to have, but that's going
hmm
to lead us to the most progress. So, or even like this morning. So, I know how you know our building, we just got like a cold plunge
Oh yeah, yeah.
recently. So like I'm dreading doing the cold plunge every morning, but I know it's that feeling of dread is my instincts or my body telling me that that's what's going to lead to the most growth. So I feel like for the most part, the things that are painful in the short term are what's going to give you the most long-term growth, and the things that are the most pleasurable in the short term are going to hinder your long-term
hmm
growth, is what I find to be true.
Yeah, that dynamic for me is really interesting because I'm incredibly irritated by the modern conception of balance. Because usually, when somebody tells you you need to have a balanced life, they're basically saying, yeah, you need to compromise everything. You don't want to be too ambitious in any one area. Just be like kind of okay in everything. And I think that that's, putting a massive artificial limit. And obviously, you can cite a million different stories of people that have like just focused on their family and been totally broke and unable to provide for them, or people that get completely consumed by their business or their work and they're not present in their family, or people that focus entirely on their community and they don't take care of themselves at all. They get like super out of shape. So there's a bunch of different stories of somebody getting focused on that, but it's like, well, that's the choice they made, and if they're okay with the trade-offs, you might not be, but good for you. Good
Right.
news, you're a different person, so you can make different choices. um, so kind of with that whole concept in mind, what does it look like for you in figuring out like what you want to really dedicate yourself to and what you're willing to sacrifice? Because I think one of the biggest problems for me personally has been setting a goal, and then not not really getting clear on how much it means to me. And so it's instead of like hitting goals and keep moving higher, you just kind of keep that stagnation across the board, because you say you want to do this thing, but you don't actually get clear on what you're willing to sacrifice to get to it, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And there's this one really good book uh, written by John Wetmore. He's in the life insurance industry, and
Hmm.
there's a exercise in the book where he has you write out what you want, and then directly next to it, you have to write out what you're willing to give up to hit that goal.
Mm.
So I think that's a very, because a lot of times, like even whether it's like a bad habit or a goal you want, you can't just quit something. You have to replace it. So what are you going to replace your time wasting activities with? Is it going to be something that's moving you towards your goal or away from it? You can never really just like get rid of something or just push towards something. You're going to have to sacrifice something. So I feel like that was a very, very good exercise that I did. And
hmm
for example, like me and my girlfriend this year, we said we're not going to drink any alcohol the entire year, all of 2024. And
Nice.
it's like it's a super easy thing. I've never had any issues with drinking in the past. It was just that's not something that's moving me towards my goals. So why am I going to do it? And honestly, I don't. have zero desire to drink once the year ends, once we complete the challenge. Because I feel like the further away from it you get, you just realize how many different things there are to stop you from
Hmm.
hitting your goals. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered the question at all, but
No, no, that's great, man. Yeah, and it is really interesting with the question of like what you're willing to sacrifice because that point is going to be different for everyone. So like some people are going to be um super committed to going after something incredibly hard up to a certain point. So like my dad is a good example. In the company that he works in and a couple of companies he's been with in the past, he could be a C-suite executive. Like he could be a VP, he could be higher than that, but he's gotten pretty much as high in the organization as he possibly can without needing to be on call 24/7. And because he's very
mm,
deliberate about being active in our family, he's like, yeah, I don't want to have to interrupt Sunday dinner or, get up at 3 a.m. or whatever to put out a fire. And I like, yeah, I don't know exactly what kind of a life is the ultimate end goal. If it's something I built myself, then I'm going to want to be more involved in that. But I have massive respect for him for being able to
absolutely.
clearly determine that as opposed to just getting on the train of like, well, climbing the ladder is what people do. Um, and then, you know, your life's a dumpster fire because you're not intentional about it. And you say, how did I get here? And I think one of the things that's really damaging in society right now is that we're very eager to point the blame finger everywhere else. It's like, oh, well, I can't. Um, like a good example to just kind of continue this analogy is you'd say, oh, well, I can't spend a lot of time with my family because my boss is so demanding and I have so many responsibilities. It's like, okay, well, you didn't just like magically appear in that spot. What did you do to get there?
Right.
So for young men that are listening to this right now and they want to get started, they're ambitious, you've got that energy, you've got that hunger. Um, Going back a little bit to what you were saying about, excuse me, atomic habits. Um, what would you say would be those non-negotiables that you should try to get in place? And then um, what would be the principles that you keep in mind when you're trying to figure out like what actually means enough to you that you're willing to sacrifice for it and what doesn't?
Yeah, I'd say some non-negotiables to get in place, or at least what really helped me was a consistent workout routine. I believe a strong body, strong mind, and I believe that's going to translate. You're going to feel more confident
Hmm.
when whether you are in sales or whether you're not in sales. That's going to translate because you're going to feel more confident. Also, as well, a consistent, or I would say more so monitoring your entertainment to education ratio. So, like, how much time are you spending watching TV shows versus reading a book or listening to a podcast? So for me, something I have like a habit tracking app. So that way I can kind of see my numbers for
Mm.
the week, month. I can share the name of it. I forget exactly what it's called. But my goal, I aim to read 20 pages a day. I don't hit it every single day, but so far this year, there's been 63% of the days this year that I've hit it. So I'm not perfect at all, but I'm going to aim to improve that.
Hmm.
So that's something I like to do, as well as something that I feel is good for my mind is I like doing the Wim Hof breath work. So for me, that's a habit
Mm.
that I started at the beginning of the year that I feel I do usually do it right after waking in the morning. I feel it's something that helps get oxygen flow into my brain and helps me just feel more calm when I'm waking up. That way, I'm not starting my day with a huge dopamine hit on social media and
Hmm.
Instagram. But and then the second part of your question, I believe you were asking about principles to keep in mind when what exactly?
Yeah, just for figuring out like what you're willing to sacrifice for and then what doesn't matter that much to you.
Okay. Yeah, I'd say with that and like the perfect example of your dad, like your dad knew exactly what he's willing to give up, and I think that's perfect. And I think I heard this the other day that the most dangerous people is the people who are lazy but ambitious. So
Yep.
they want everything, but they're not willing to put in the work. So I think that's a dangerous place to be. Whereas if someone they know what they want, they're willing to work to get it. They know they're not willing to give up this. I think that's perfectly fine. I think most people that I've spoken to that are around our age is they're not really sure what they want. So I think
Hmm.
just getting clear on that, what that looks like for you, what are you willing to give up, whether it's like partying, drinking, even spending some time with friends and family, because I'm sure as you know, getting started in something like sales initially even, it does take a lot of time. It's a long
Hmm.
days. You're usually fully commissioned. So you really do got to figure out what you're willing to give up and if that's the path for you. And if it's not, at least identifying that and moving on and being at peace with that.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, to go back to what you're saying about giving up alcohol, first off, good for you. I actually committed to the exact same thing on the 12th of this month, so I'm just a couple weeks into
Let's
that.
go.
Similarly, I've never had a drinking issue. I do really like whiskey, but like it's never been an addiction or anything. Um, but now that I've been drinking for a few years since turning 21, I'm just curious if there's going to be any noticeable impact. I have, like, if you look at it from a scientific perspective, being drunk is basically your body saying, hey, there's a lot of poison here. We need to suspend all other functions to get it out. And I think, like,
Yeah,
um, do you know any of like Bedros Keuilian's work? Do you follow him at all?
I've heard of him. I
Okay.
haven't listened to like too much of his podcast,
Yeah.
but
So I kind of like, off and on check in on his stuff. He is very vocal about giving up alcohol because he did, I think, a few years ago at this point. And his whole thing was like kind of waking up, you know, kind of in a haze, kind of foggy minded. And he's like, yeah, I don't want it slowing me down in the mornings. So I think, like, for us being young guys, we don't notice the effects that much, especially if we're not like deliberately trying to get drunk. But with things like that,
right,
it's so interesting to me when people oppose that. 99% of the time, they're not actually telling you that they think you should have done something differently. They're telling you that they have chosen differently. And you're like, well, duh, of course. Again, we're different people. You're a grown
right.
adult. Um, but I think that one of the things that's been very interesting, in just my own observation of the world, is people trying to generalize things that specifically and particularly work for them. So I guess what I'm getting at with this for the audience is like, by all means, if you feel like you get a value out of this episode, take what Trent's saying or anything that I've said that you found value in and apply it to your life. But if you don't feel like it's relevant, we're not telling you that like this is the only way to live your life, or this
Exactly.
is the only option. Like, you're your own man. With the demographics listening to the show, you're probably on the younger end, so you've got plenty of time to screw around and figure out what works and what doesn't. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have urgency, um, but it does mean that, like, there's not the same pressure as being like 60 years old and you know like close to retirement basically and not having anything to show for it. um so yeah, just please get very clear on what you want, the type of man you want to be, and then if the type of person that you want to be isn't exactly what we're talking about here, that's fine. Go listen to a different episode, go listen to a different podcast. But like we were saying earlier, find that tribe that's aligned with your vision, because that's the only way you're ever going um, to realize it. So yeah, I guess to start wrapping things up here, obviously this whole show and this the project here is really focused on, as I say, making men that are ready, willing, and able to confront life's challenges and win. So, what do you think success really means to you if you could just simplify it into a few sentences? What is that thing that you're shooting for, trying to become?
Yeah, I would say success to me would be freedom from when it comes to time, the expectations placed on me by others, maybe in a
Mm,
sense of not feeling obligated in a sense, because obviously, like coming up where I'm at now, even there's like certain sacrifices, like we've been talking about,
mm,
sacrifices you're gonna have to make. I think success would eventually be getting to a position to where I'm fully in control of, not that I don't feel fully in control because I believe I have control. I believe we only have control over our one thing, and that's our mind.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's fully control over like my schedule, things like that. And I know it's going to take time, but I almost equate um, success with like freedom and how I see wealth is like an abundance of options. And
Hmm.
not that you have to act on all the options, but just having choices, I believe, is very powerful because it allows you to, you could even think of like, say, like politics, for example. If you're someone who has money, you're not as easily influenced and you're
Hmm.
not as easily able to be bought. So I just think just really being able to think for myself, speak for myself, and act for myself without
Hmm.
feeling indebted to anyone else, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Could you speak to that a little bit more? Because, obviously, like if you, um, like you get married or you build a business and you have employees, like you've, by nature of forming those relationships, you've created obligations. And I think it would be
That's a
pretty
good point.
pretty easy to say, like, you can't just throw these people under the bus, or like, it's 3 o'clock, it's time to go pick up your kids from school, and you're like, yeah, man,
Right.
I'm not feeling it today. Like, no, you go get your kids. So what would you say would be like, obviously being an American, I'm a big fan of personal freedom. I believe in having the ability to make your own choices and build your life with your own two hands and taking responsibility for whatever that is. But what would you say is like the either the line between those two things, or like what you would consider to be, we could say, like a positive obligation versus one that's just going to slow you
Yeah.
down?
That's a great point to clarify that as well, because I do believe having not having obligations isn't necessarily what I would define as success, but maybe more so I would say like involuntary obligations
Mm,
of where you're like put in situations where like I kind of owe this person this because they did this favor for me kind of thing.
mm,
Whereas I do fully believe that if you're in a leadership position, I believe leadership equates to responsibility and you're responsible for the success of everyone that you're
mm.
leading. And same as in like the marriage example and having children. So I think I would, yeah, definitely distinct that between involuntary obligation and maybe not even obligation would be the best word, thinking on it now. Maybe almost like indebtedness to
Yeah, it
others.
sounds like what you're, at least from my perspective, it sounds like you're talking more about almost personal sovereignty. So it's like, yeah, you have these obligations and you've accepted these duties to other people, but you're still in control of your own life, as opposed to almost having somebody like being a backseat driver and constantly telling you what you have to do. Um,
Exactly. Yeah, as long as you're
yeah.
the one picking, I mean, we're all going to have problems at the end of the day. I want to be able to pick the problems I'm going to have, whether it's leading a team of people and having to figure out the best way to motivate them, things like that. I want to pick the problems rather than have the problems pick me, in a
Yeah,
sense.
100%. And that's something that's interesting too, is like the higher level you get, things don't get easier. You actually get bigger problems, but the hope is you'll just
Yeah.
be better equipped to deal with them. There's one, you just remind me of a movie I saw years and years ago. Um, oh gosh, what was it? I think it was some kind of musical I was watching with my family. Might have been Holiday Inn. I don't know. It's not important. Anyway, there's these two characters. They go off, they fight in World War II, they come back, and one guy saved this other guy's life. And um, the guy who saved his life is like constantly holding it over his head and like using it as leverage over him. And eventually this character gets fed up and he's like, no, enough. So it's like, I guess kind of the takeaway for the audience from this would be like, you should take care of the people around you. And like, as a matter of personal honor, if you owe somebody something, you should make good on that. But because you owe somebody something, that doesn't mean that they walk all over you. So I think it doesn't, I think PBD has actually talked about this before, where he said, like, if you ask me for money, I give you money once, no questions asked. You don't have to pay me back. I will never help you again because I don't want to create that like entitlement system. And
Dependency.
yeah, and so I think
Yeah.
So I guess is what you're saying kind of like having very clear boundaries within your obligations and like what you're going to allow and then what you're like, no, that's too much of an infringement on my own personal sovereignty.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that's more so where I'm at with things as far as like
Gotcha.
we're all gonna have the obligations. I want to choose my obligations, not have people try to put them on me.
Hmm.
Um, so that's kind of where I'm at. And honestly, like you said, this is like where I'm at right now. I could have a completely different definition or
Hmm.
um what I view success as in 6 months from now, and I probably will because I feel like every three to every 3 to 6 months, I feel like I'm constantly growing. I get new
Good.
information. So I reevaluate what I currently thought about something, and I could be wrong. So
Yeah.
could be wrong now about my definition of success, and maybe 6 months or so from now, we'll do one of these again and
Hmm.
have a completely different definition.
Yeah. No, that's such a great point because especially, you know, God willing, having so much time ahead of both of us in our lives, assuming it doesn't get cut short for whatever reason. Um, Probably, yeah, one of the most humbling experiences that I have consistently is realizing that, like, for whatever I think I know in the moment, I can look back on what I thought even just a year or two ago and be like, well, some of that made sense, but some of that you're like, ugh. And so,
Yeah,
like you're saying, having that constant evolution, it's like right now is just your best guess, but who knows? Who knows?
yeah, dude, for
Um,
sure.
Sweet. So I think to kind of bring us to a close here, um, what do you think it really means to be a man?
Yeah, I think to be a man, it means to be a leader, to take responsibility for where you're at, to not feel sorry for yourself. Because at the end of the day, I think one of the most freeing feelings as a man is realizing that nobody cares about your success as much as you do. Like you can try to like feel sorry for yourself, but at the end of the day, you're only hindering your growth. So I think the sooner you can really take full responsibility, take action for yourself, ask the questions if you're in the rooms with the people where you can ask the questions from, they're not gonna most of the time just come to you and seek to help you. You're gonna have to ask for the help, and
Hmm.
that's gonna be what can separate you. But I think a man is someone who takes responsibility, is a leader, for his friends, family, whether that's his household. But that's my definition of what a man
Hmm.
is.
Powerful stuff, brother. Well, yeah, thank you so much for coming on. If people have any questions, they want to find you, what are the best ways to get in contact?
Yeah, the best way to find me is going to be on Instagram. It'll be Trent Keller, Keller_. That'll be on Instagram. But Gabe, thank you for having me on, man. I really enjoyed our conversation and hope we are able to provide some value for the viewers.
Absolutely, brother. Yeah, and I mean, really curious to see where things are in a year or two from now. So we'll
Yeah,
definitely be staying in touch.
for sure, man.
All right. Thanks, brother. And that concludes episode 18 of the Operation Paragon podcast. You can find the show at Operation Paragon on Instagram and YouTube, as well as the podcast feed on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Until next time, remember that greatness is within your reach.